Hello, I'm Mark Benison, and this is Introduction to Unity in Visual Studio. Firstly, to get Unity, go to the unity.com website, create an account. If you are a student, create a student account, assuming you've got an appropriate academia email address. I recommend that above the personal account because whilst they're both free, the student account is a little bit better. But ultimately both will work fine. Once you've created an account on the website, you can basically come down to, go up to Developer Tools and then go to download the Unity Hub. And there's two things, there's Unity Hub and there's Unity Engine. The version of Unity Hub is completely up to you, but Unity Engine will be more specific on which version you want. If you go an older version of Hub, like version 2 point something, it'll probably look something like this. However, if you go for the slightly newer, updated version, version 3 onwards, you tend to go for they went for dark mode, which personally I prefer. You'll have a project list which will be empty, but as you work on projects that will grow, and on the top right you'll have the option to create a new project. Now, assuming you haven't installed Unity yet, this is where we can look to install it. So what you can do from the installs panel, so I don't have the version I want here, so I'm going to go to install. And rather than pick one from the list, I'm actually going to go to archive, and then go to download archive, which opens up a web browser. From here, I can go to the appropriate year and cycle down to the version I want. And you'll see these are updated very regularly. On this occasion, I'm going to 2022.1.14, but use the version that your module leader has requested. Back in Unity Hub now, we can select from the drop down the things that we want. Now I've got Visual Studio Community 2019 installed. I'm actually going to update that to 2022. I do want the Android builds because I want to be able to do some Android development. On this occasion, I'm not going for Universal. You can add all these back in later. I'm not needing the web yet. I'm going to actually leave all of that. I don't need other languages, so I'm just going to click Continue. So all I'm going for is the Android build. If you don't have Visual Studio installed, by all means, if it gives you the option, you can select it. But we can go through that separately and just install it as a separate thing. Now, I don't recommend upgrading your project's version. That is to say, if you make it in one version, I wouldn't upgrade it to another one. At least if you do so, make sure you've got a sufficient backup, because when you update the version, it will change the original file and it can become corrupted. So this is your warning. Just don't do it unless you feel confident and competent and you have made sure you've got a backup of the files that are working, so you can always go back to the previous versions. Getting set up, again, if you've got an old version of Hub, you'll have to pick from the template list. There might be a few on there. 2D, 3D, HD, RP, and URP are typically the options. You can see here they actually have put in high definition RP, which is render pipeline, and universal render pipeline on this version. And you have to give this project a suitable name, a project name. And you have to pick the location where you want to save all your projects. Now I create a folder called Unity Projects. I save all my projects in there. It may default to a set location. I recommend you pick an appropriate location for yourselves. If you're on a university or academia machine, then you may want to consider whether you have access to the drive, whether it gets wiped in the night, and all these kinds of things, and follow instructions from your institution about where it's appropriate to save. If you've got the newer version of Unity Hub, which I do recommend, it's a little bit of a different setup. The templates now are down the left hand side. You can change your version at the top. And again, just choose the location on the bottom right. Make sure you do select where you want to save them. Make sure you know where that is and make sure it's backed up. I recommend using GitHub and putting everything on GitHub. If you're making a 2D or 3D game, it's pretty straightforward. You either go for 2D or 3D. If you know you're going to be doing certain things with graphics, you might want to go for a universal or even a HD render pipeline. Typically, you'd be instructed to do so. For myself, I would typically go to a 3D universal render pipeline, which may need downloading before installing, as you can see with the little icon next to that one at the bottom. This is the Unity interface once you get into it. This is an older version of Unity, but they're all relatively similar. They all have the same things. We've got the hierarchy on the left-hand side. You can move all these things around, and I'll show you where I'd move things to. The hierarchy shows what's in the scene, and the scene here is the window that we can move the camera about and have a look around. Well, no, sorry, not the camera. You can move what you can see as a developer. I shouldn't say the camera, because there is a camera in the scene, and we can move that separately, and that's what the game view will see. And the game view is another tab, usually at the top. We can flick over to it and see what that camera is actually seeing. You can't move around from this view. This is, this would have to be coded or scripted to move around. This is what they will see in game. And when you press play, it defaults to flick to this view, and when you press stop, it'll typically default back to the scene view. You've got a project pane on the bottom, and in there is where we'll have all our assets and our files and our scripts and things, and that's basically our file explorer, if you like. And on the right, we'll have the inspector. And the inspector is wherever we've selected will appear in the inspector, and as we click on different things, the inspector will change to view different objects, and it'll show all the properties and variables and things that we can change for that object. And there'll be components, which are things that we can add into each object. That'll be shown there too. We can add things on and take things away. For Visual Studio, we're going to go to visualstudio.microsoft.com. And you want to find to download Visual Studio. I would recommend the Community Edition 2022. You can use Visual Studio Code with Unity. I really like Visual Studio Code, but I prefer Visual Studio Community when it comes to working with Unity. I just find it's a little slicker and a little better with certain things. It takes it just a bit longer to load the first time you open it. The installation file should download with your browser, and you should be able to open it and install it. Once the Visual Studio installer has installed, so this is a separate thing to Visual Studio, there's an install, and you can run this from the start menu. So we're going to select components that we want to install, and if you want to edit and add these in later, anything that you've missed, you can come back by running the Visual Studio installer from your start menu. For this, I actually don't need a lot of these on here. I'm going to go straight down to gaming. You can select game development with Unity from the list, and it will select a lot of appropriate files that you might need. There's nothing else really on here that is essential for what you probably want, but there are things that I'll probably come back and add in. I like some data storage. I like using SQL Server. I might do some C++, so I'll probably select that. If I'm honest, you can actually go to individual components and select the main bits you need from there. And the main thing I want to suggest is if you type in Unity in the search, and what you want is Visual Studio Tools for Unity. You don't actually need the hub, because we've just installed that. I'm actually going to select from the list here the game development, because that typically will include Visual Studio Tools for Unity, but also tries to include the hub. So I'm actually, on mine, I'm going to deselect that. But it's got the IntelliCode, so that's the main thing. Either way, having those Visual Studio tools is pretty much all you really need. With Unity installed and Visual Studio 2022 installed too, we can go to projects, select a new project, and if you're using the older version, you've got to select the editor version first. From here, in this version of Hub, we can select the editor from the drop-down list, and it's there. I'm going for the latest one in this case. Again, use whichever version you're required to use for your program. And a lot of things I'm going to be working on are 3D based, so for this project I'm going to choose 3D, and I'm just going to call it meaningful name, but you put in a meaningful name. You can choose spaces in your project names. I sometimes choose not to, and then select a location. I save all my documents in a Unity projects folder, and the location varies depending on what computer I'm on. Create project, and then you have a waiting game waiting for this to be created for the first time. Now this is the default view in Unity. However, I'm going to point out that there is a console that you may not automatically have, and if you can't find it, you can go to Window, General, and select Console, or you can see Control Shift and C should bring the console window open. So that's there. Now I'm going to rearrange this for a typical widescreen view. I have my own 2x3 Benison look, but I'm going to go for 2x3. And then I'll show you how I reconfigure this. I like to see the scene view and the game view together. I'm going to put my hierarchy and project pane. I'd like the project pane underneath it. And I'm actually going to reorganize this a little bit more. I've noticed the console window's disappeared. I'm going to go to General, Console from the window menu. Appears separately. I'm going to ping it to the bottom of the inspector. I'm actually going to ping the hierarchy to the left of the inspector and the project underneath the hierarchy. And I can move this more central. reposition things. And now I've got my hierarchy here, which we can expand open so we can see the different components that we've got. The project pane, I don't like this view, so I'm going to change it from 2 column to 1 column using the ... in the top right of that pane. I don't need the packages, it's the scenes and things. It's this assets section that's most important. I'm going to shrink that down a little bit. The console is really important when you're debugging. And then my inspector's there, which is when I select something. Select it from there, it'll give me all the components for the thing I've selected, so main camera and directional light. You can then save this layout as I've done, and I'm going to select this layout here, and you can see I've already set it up. One other little thing you can do when you press play, see my screen goes red while it's running. When you're debugging code and doing things with code, you can't make certain changes. Well, you can make changes. You shouldn't make changes to the code while it's running. And if you make any changes to the inspector when you stop running, those changes won't be saved. So it's better to make the changes when it's not running. So by default, it just goes to a different shade of grey when it's not as obvious. So I like to customize it. If we go to preferences and we can go to colors, and you can see under general play mode tint, and there's the red. Actually, better press play so you can see what tint it's going to be and see the changes live. Because you will notice certain colors are just too dark. I mean, it might work for you, and if you don't feel you've got to go for red, there might be other colors that you like to go for. Check that your editor works. We're going to start by going into the assets, and I'm going to create a folder. So right click, create folder, and I just right clicked on the assets word there to create a new folder. I need to name this, so I'm going to call it scripts. And then I'm going to right click on scripts and go to create and select a C# script. I'm going to rename this to be a test script. I don't probably need to put the word script in a script file, it should be pretty obvious. And then I'm going to open that up by double clicking on it. Now to start with, this has actually opened up in a different version of Visual Studio than how I want this is actually opened up in 2019. But also something to note, and this is what I want you to pay attention to every time you open up a new project, is the word model behavior same color as the class name. So I call this test script, and it inherits from model behavior, which is a Unity based class, and they should both be the same color. And you can see that they're not. I'm going to show you how to fix that. I'm going to close down Visual Studio. What you'll find is if the syntax highlighting isn't right, the color isn't right, then also IntelliSense won't work. And IntelliSense is what makes Visual Studio so powerful. It helps us write our code and spot errors. So we need to fix this. So one thing is to make sure you have the Visual Studio code, Visual Studio tools for Unity installed on Visual Studio. And if you followed that through properly, the next thing is to go down to Preferences, External Tools, and then from the drop-down list, you want to make sure it's got the IDE you're using. So I'm going to go for Visual Studio Community. Now, actually looking at that, it actually had Visual Studio 2019 selected, so it should have actually worked. But I'm going to select Visual Studio 2022 because I know I installed the things I wanted on there. I'll close that. I want to reopen it. Now this time, model behavior is the right color. You will notice it'll take a few seconds before it changes typically. So it will start white and then it should take a few seconds while the plugins in the background load in, and then it should go the same color. Thank you very much. You may like to take a look at my other videos or subscribe to be notified of future content.